Ethan Cross was a name that carried weight across every corner of the business world. His empire stretched from high-rise tech headquarters to sprawling real estate ventures and luxury brands that whispered his initials like a signature of power. To the public, he was brilliance wrapped in danger, an untouchable force who built himself into a titan before the age of 40. To those who worked under him, however, he was something else entirely, a man to be feared. Boardrooms would fall silent when he entered. Assistants lowered their eyes when he passed by, clutching clipboards and tablets as if any mistake might cost them their jobs, or worse, draw his gaze. Ethan's temper was legendary, his tongue sharp enough to slice through egos built over decades. He demanded perfection, and when it wasn't delivered, his fury left scars that no paycheck could heal. They whispered about him in elevators, in hushed corners of restaurants, and in the safety of homes. Don't speak unless spoken to. Never question him in front of others. Keep your head down, or you'll be the next one out. These weren't rules in a handbook, but laws everyone obeyed if they wanted to survive under his command. Ethan Cross was more than a billionaire. He was a storm in an Armani suit, striking fear with every glare. And yet, behind the walls of his glass and steel penthouse, Ethan lived a life as hollow as the silence that followed his rage. The city skyline glittered like diamonds every night, but none of it touched him. His wealth filled vaults and bank accounts, but it couldn't fill the ache that lived deep in his chest. The parties, the cars, the women who clung to him for status, all of it was noise, distractions to bury the truth. The truth was loneliness. Ethan carried it like a shadow, hidden from the world but constant at his side. Once, years ago, there had been laughter in his life, warmth that made him believe power wasn't everything. But betrayal had cut deeper than any knife. Friends turned into vultures, lovers into liars, and family into strangers. Piece by piece, Ethan built walls so high no one could climb them, convinced that distance was the only way to protect what was left of him. That was why his temper burned so hot. Every insult, every dismissal, every command was a weapon designed to keep people away. And it worked. Employees feared him, rivals respected him, and strangers idolized him from afar. But no one truly knew Ethan Cross. No one dared get close. At charity galas, women fluttered in sequined dresses, but their eyes told him everything: ambition, calculation, hunger. At board meetings, men boasted of loyalty but sharpened knives behind their backs. Ethan stood above them all, untouchable, unreachable, a king with no kingdom but power itself. Still, there were nights when the mask cracked. Alone, Ethan would sit in silence with a glass of scotch, staring at the portrait of his late mother, the only person who had ever seen him for who he was. In those quiet hours, the terrifying billionaire was just a man, tired of fighting ghosts that never left him. The city believed Ethan Cross was invincible, a force that couldn't be broken or tamed. And maybe that was true, for now. But life has a way of humbling even the strongest, especially when the unexpected comes knocking. Because somewhere out there, fate was already moving the pieces. And soon, the one person no one could have imagined, the one woman fearless enough to look Ethan Cross in the eye, was about to walk into his world. And nothing would ever be the same again. Amora Johnson had never been the type to fade into the background. From the moment she walked into a room, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention but commanded respect. Her rich brown skin, intelligent eyes, and warm smile projected strength and empathy in equal measure. Where others tried to impress with noise and bravado, Amora impressed with presence. She wasn't born into wealth. Every step of her career had been earned through late nights, relentless determination, and an unshakable belief in her own worth. Her field, corporate consulting, brought her into the orbit of powerful men and women who ruled entire industries. It was a world of sharp suits, sharper tongues, and even sharper knives. Amora had seen arrogance, entitlement, and cruelty in the halls of power before, but she'd never let it bend her spirit. And now, for the first time, her work intersected directly with Ethan Cross. When her firm was contracted to oversee a high-profile merger within his empire, colleagues whispered warnings. Stay out of his way. Don't challenge him. Smile, nod, and hope he doesn't notice you. But Amora wasn't wired to cower. She respected power but never worshipped it. To her, a man's wealth didn't erase his flaws. Billionaire or not, Ethan Cross was just another client. The first time she saw him was at a corporate gala announcing the partnership. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers and laughter, but when Ethan entered, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to lips. His reputation had arrived before him, and the crowd responded with fear disguised as admiration. Amora watched him from across the room, noting the rigid posture, the sharpness in his eyes, the way even the boldest executive shrank under his gaze. For a moment, she wondered if the stories were exaggerated, until it happened. A young associate made the mistake of presenting him with incorrect financial data. The moment Ethan noticed, his temper ignited. His voice, low but deadly, cut through the chatter like a blade. "Do you even know what numbers you're holding? Or are you just wasting everyone's time?" The associate stammered, shrinking back, his face flushing with humiliation as the crowd tried to pretend they weren't watching. Silence fell heavy. No one dared intervene. No one dared even look directly at Ethan, except Amora. She stepped forward, heels clicking against marble, her chin lifted with calm certainty. "Mr. Cross," she said evenly, her voice carrying across the room, "mistakes happen. What matters is correcting them, not tearing someone down in front of the world." Gasps rippled. People exchanged wide-eyed glances. No one spoke to Ethan Cross like that. For a heartbeat, the billionaire's eyes burned with fury. His empire was built on fear, and this woman had just cracked the foundation in front of everyone. But instead of backing down, Amora held his gaze, steady and unflinching. And in that moment, for the first time in years, Ethan Cross wasn't in control. The air in the conference room was suffocating, thick with the weight of Ethan Cross's fury. A mistake in a presentation, minor to anyone else, had set him off. His voice, sharp and cutting, lashed out at a team of executives who cowered like schoolchildren before a tyrant. Charts and papers quivered in nervous hands, and no one dared to breathe too loudly. "You call this preparation?" Ethan's words slammed against the walls like gunfire. "Billions of dollars hinge on this deal, and you bring me mediocrity. Do you think I built this empire on half measures?" Heads lowered. Chairs creaked as people sank into them, praying not to be singled out. Everyone knew Ethan's wrath could end careers with a single word. Everyone, except Amora. She sat near the far end of the table, her posture steady, her expression calm. Where others avoided his gaze, she leaned forward, her voice cutting through the silence. "Enough, Mr. Cross." The room froze. Pens stilled mid-scribble. Eyes darted between her and Ethan, disbelief written across every face. Ethan's head snapped toward her, his glare like fire. "What did you just say?" "I said enough," Amora repeated, her tone unwavering. "You're humiliating people who work tirelessly for you. If there's an error, correct it. But tearing down your own team in front of everyone, that's not strength, it's fear." The gasp that rippled through the room was louder than any applause could have been. No one had ever dared to talk back to Ethan Cross, not board members, not rival CEOs, not even lifelong friends. But this woman, this consultant who wasn't even on his payroll, had just stood up to him. Ethan's jaw tightened, his hands flexing against the polished wood of the table. For a long, dangerous moment, the room held its breath. Everyone expected the explosion, the verbal evisceration that would end her career before it began. But it didn't come. Instead, Ethan leaned back slowly, eyes locked on Amora as if she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. His anger didn't vanish, but something else flickered beneath it: curiosity, intrigue. For the first time in years, someone had pierced the armor he'd spent his life forging. He gave a low, humorless laugh. "Interesting," he murmured, almost to himself. Then, with a sharp nod, he dismissed the meeting, leaving the executives scattering like frightened birds. But Ethan didn't forget the woman who stood her ground. And Amora knew she had just stepped into dangerous territory, yet she felt no regret. The night after their explosive clash, Amora found herself lingering in the grand halls of Cross Tower. Most of the building was dark, the usual buzz of assistants and executives long gone. She had stayed late to review documents, determined to prove she could stand in Ethan's world without faltering. As she walked toward the elevator, she caught sight of an open door at the end of the corridor, his office. The golden city lights spilled through its glass walls, illuminating the man inside. Ethan Cross, the untouchable billionaire, wasn't barking orders or slamming fists against polished wood. Instead, he sat quietly at his desk, his shoulders slumped in a way Amora had never seen. In his hand, he held a silver-framed photograph. Even from the doorway, Amora could make out the image of a smiling woman, a softness in her features that mirrored Ethan's own. His thumb traced the edge of the frame with surprising tenderness. For a moment, he wasn't the ruthless king of steel and glass. He was just a man grieving something the world couldn't see. Amora should have turned away, but she didn't. Something in her stilled, caught between curiosity and compassion. And then she saw it, Ethan leaning back, exhaling deeply, as if the weight of years pressed down on him. His jaw, usually set like iron, trembled just slightly. The sight stirred something in her chest. Perhaps his anger wasn't born from arrogance but from pain. Perhaps the fury that drove him was less about control and more about keeping his demons at bay. Ethan sensed her presence before she could retreat. His eyes snapped up, sharp as ever, but instead of fury, there was something else, vulnerability quickly masked. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice lower than usual, rough around the edges. Amora met his gaze steadily. "I wasn't spying. I just didn't want you to be alone with it." Her words lingered between them, soft but daring. Ethan looked at her as though she had crossed a line no one else would ever dare approach. Yet, instead of pushing her away, he didn't. He couldn't. For the first time, Ethan Cross allowed someone to glimpse the man behind the armor, and it unsettled him more than any confrontation ever had. Whispers followed Ethan Cross everywhere. To the world, he was the untouchable billionaire, the storm in a tailored suit. But behind that polished image, rumors swirled like smoke, stories of betrayal, of heartbreak, of wounds so deep they carved the man he had become. Amora hadn't meant to care. She told herself she was only there to do her job, to deliver results, and nothing more. Yet after that late-night glimpse into his private grief, something shifted. She wanted to understand him, not the titan everyone feared, but the man behind the fire. Against her better judgment, she began to dig. It started with hushed conversations among longtime employees. His father left when he was barely a teenager, one whispered. Walked out without a word, leaving his mother to pick up the pieces. Another added, he built everything from nothing, but don't mention his family. It sets him off. The deeper she looked, the more painful the truths became. Ethan's drive, his ruthless perfectionism, suddenly made sense. A boy abandoned had turned himself into a man who would never need anyone again. Dependence, to him, was weakness. Trust was a risk not worth taking. But there was more, something even sharper, more personal. Years ago, before the empire became untouchable, Ethan had been engaged. She was beautiful, ambitious, and she had promised him forever. Yet when his business hit its first major crisis, she hadn't stood beside him. Instead, she had chosen wealth in another man's arms, a rival investor who offered her security Ethan couldn't guarantee at the time. The betrayal cut him to the core. Friends spoke of how he had changed after that, his laughter gone, his warmth replaced by steel. Ethan Cross, the man of flesh and feeling, had died the day his fiancée traded his love for a richer offer. What rose in his place was the cold, calculating force that ruled boardrooms and terrified underlings. Amora closed her notebook, her chest heavy with the weight of what she'd learned. The puzzle pieces of his anger fit together now: abandonment, betrayal, loneliness, all scars that explained the man he had become. But understanding him didn't make him less dangerous. If anything, it made her more cautious. Sympathy tugged at her heart, but so did warning. Ethan Cross wasn't just wounded, he was guarded, fortified by walls no one had managed to scale. And yet, she had already stepped closer than anyone else. Closer than she should have. The next board meeting felt like walking into a battlefield. Ethan Cross sat at the head of the table, his presence casting a shadow so heavy it silenced even the boldest voices. His team shuffled papers nervously, desperate to avoid mistakes, desperate to avoid his rage. And, as always, his rage found a target. An executive stumbled through a presentation, his numbers slightly off. Ethan's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening like a vice. "Do you people ever think before wasting my time?" he snapped, his words slicing through the room. "This is incompetence dressed up in suits." The man paled. No one moved. The atmosphere turned to ice. No one dared intervene, except Amora. She leaned forward, her voice steady, cutting across his tirade. "You know, Mr. Cross, for someone who claims to value results, you spend a lot of energy breaking people instead of building them." The silence that followed was deafening. Heads jerked in her direction. A collective breath was held, waiting for the explosion that would end her career. Ethan's gaze locked on her, sharp and dangerous. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Amora said, calm but unwavering. "Intimidation might make people fear you, but fear doesn't inspire loyalty. It doesn't earn respect. You want people to give you their best. Try giving them something worth believing in." The room crackled with tension. Executives stared at their notes, desperate to disappear. Ethan rose slowly from his chair, his towering frame radiating fury. "You think you know how to run my empire better than I do." His voice boomed across the room. Amora didn't flinch. "I think you've confused control with leadership. And there's a difference." For a moment, it seemed he might erupt completely, his temper volcanic, unstoppable. But then, something shifted. Beneath the fire in his eyes flickered something else: respect, intrigue, even admiration. Most people cowered when Ethan Cross unleashed his wrath. But Amora met it head-on, refusing to surrender an inch. She was fire against fire, strength against strength. And to his own shock, Ethan felt his anger twist into something he hadn't experienced in years: attraction. Dangerous, consuming attraction. The meeting ended abruptly with Ethan's cold dismissal, though his gaze lingered on Amora as the room emptied. She had risked everything by challenging him so openly, and yet she walked out unscathed. No, more than unscathed, empowered. For Ethan, the experience was unsettling. No one had ever dared confront him like that, and certainly no one had ever left him wanting more. She had crossed a line others wouldn't even approach, and instead of destroying her, he found himself drawn to her. Amora had done the unthinkable. And Ethan Cross, for the first time, realized the untouchable fortress he had built around himself might not be as impenetrable as he believed. Ethan Cross wasn't a man who let people in. His world was built on steel, glass, and unbreakable walls that kept everyone at a safe distance. Yet against every instinct, he found himself inviting Amora into places no one else had ever seen. It began with small gestures. A late evening discussion that drifted away from contracts and into personal stories. A rare, almost imperceptible smile when she made a sharp observation that cut through his arrogance. Even the way he allowed silence to linger between them. Silence that wasn't threatening, but strangely comfortable. One evening, he asked her to join him on a drive through the city. His car purred like a beast under his control, but for once, Ethan wasn't filling the air with dominance. Instead, he spoke of his mother, how she had raised him alone after his father vanished. How her laughter used to fill the smallest apartment with more joy than all the wealth in the world could ever buy. Amora listened, not interrupting, not judging. And when his voice caught, just slightly, she turned to him with a gentleness he hadn't known in years. "You loved her deeply," she said softly. He gave a short nod, his grip tightening on the wheel. "She was the only person I trusted. The only one who never left." That night, Amora saw the truth. Ethan's empire wasn't built from ambition alone, it was built from fear of being abandoned again. His temper, his need for control, his ruthlessness, every piece of it was armor against a world that had already broken him once. For Ethan, the realization was more dangerous than any rival. Amora was slipping past his defenses, and he couldn't stop her. She didn't flinch at his anger, didn't bow to his power. She was the only person he couldn't control, and somehow, he didn't want to. Their connection grew in stolen glances, in conversations that stretched into the night, in the rare moments when Ethan allowed himself to simply be a man instead of a billionaire. But every step closer to her felt like walking on the edge of a blade. Because while Amora represented the warmth he'd long buried, Ethan knew that giving in meant risking everything he had built to protect himself. And that was the one battle he wasn't sure he could fight. It didn't take long for the world to notice. A single photograph, Ethan Cross, the untouchable billionaire, walking beside a woman who wasn't cowering but meeting his gaze with quiet defiance, was enough to ignite a storm. The tabloids pounced first. The billionaire and the black woman. Scandal or love story? Has Ethan Cross finally met his match? What began as gossip in glossy magazines spread like wildfire through social media. Comment threads dripped with curiosity, judgment, and cruel undertones. Some questioned Amora's intentions. Others whispered that Ethan was throwing away his empire for someone beneath his world. But the harshest blow came from within Ethan's own circle. Board members hinted at image risks. Old friends questioned his sanity. His most trusted advisor dared to suggest Amora was a distraction, a weakness he couldn't afford. Ethan's fury ignited like gasoline. He threatened lawsuits, demanded silence, but the damage was done. For the first time in years, he was fighting a battle he couldn't win with money or intimidation. The whispers cut deeper than he admitted, not because they questioned him, but because they targeted her. Amora, however, refused to bend. When a particularly vicious article painted her as an opportunist, she met Ethan's storming temper with steady eyes. "Let them talk," she said, her voice firm. "I know who I am. The only question is, do you know who you are when you're with me?" Her strength stunned him. He had expected fear, retreat, maybe even anger at the unfairness of it all. Instead, she stood tall, her dignity unshaken, her resolve burning brighter than the storm surrounding them. For Ethan, it was a revelation. He had built an empire by crushing opponents, by trusting no one, by fearing betrayal at every turn. Yet here was Amora, standing in the fire not because she had to, but because she chose to. And in that choice, Ethan saw something he had never known he needed. Not submission, not blind loyalty, but partnership. Against all odds, against the weight of a world determined to tear them apart, Amora's presence whispered a truth Ethan could no longer ignore. Love was not his weakness. It was his strength. The empire Ethan Cross had spent decades building was under siege. Overnight, whispers turned into headlines, and headlines into chaos. A supposed scandal broke, photographs of Amora meeting secretly with one of Ethan's fiercest rivals. The narrative was carefully crafted. The woman who had dared to tame the angry billionaire was nothing more than a pawn, a calculated betrayal designed to bring him down. Investors panicked. Stock prices dipped. Board members muttered about liability and reputation. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the ground shifting beneath him, and the sensation ignited every old wound he carried. He stormed into his office, fury blazing in his eyes, and found Amora waiting for him. She had come to explain, to tell him the photographs were doctored, the story fabricated. But before she could speak, his anger erupted. "Was this your plan all along?" Ethan's voice was sharp as broken glass. "Get close to me, then sell me out to the highest bidder." The accusation sliced deeper than any insult. Amora froze, hurt flashing across her face, but she held her ground. "You think so little of me," she whispered. "After everything we've shared." But Ethan wasn't listening. His empire was collapsing around him, and fear, disguised as rage, took control. He hurled words he didn't mean, each one cutting Amora further away. "Get out. Whatever game you're playing, it ends now. I should have known better than to let you in." Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Amora's heart fractured, not because of the lies told in the media, but because of the truth in his eyes. He didn't trust her. After everything, he still saw her as a threat, not a partner. Tears burned, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. Straightening her shoulders, she spoke with quiet strength. "I don't need your money, Ethan. And I never needed your protection. But I will not be your scapegoat." With those final words, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a drumbeat of finality. Ethan watched her go, a flicker of regret piercing through his fury, but pride locked him in silence. The door shut, and with it, the light she had brought into his world. For the first time, Ethan's empire felt truly empty. Amora left determined, her heart shattered but her dignity intact. Whatever pain she carried, she vowed never again to be anyone's pawn. even if it meant leaving behind the man she had begun to love. 4 days, Ethan Cross walked the hollow halls of his empire like a ghost. Meetings blurred into noise. Numbers scrolled across screens, but none of them mattered. For the first time in his life, he understood what true loss felt like, not the betrayal of a fiancé, not the absence of a father, but the unbearable emptiness of knowing he had driven away the only woman who ever saw him as more than his name. Amora's absence was a mirror. In it, Ethan saw not power, not dominance, but the ruins of a man who had mistaken fear for respect. The empire he had built now seemed like a gilded cage. And what good was a kingdom, if the one person who gave it meaning refused to share it with him? The final straw came when another headline hit the press. It wasn't about his empire, but about her. Amora Johnson, painted once again as the opportunist, the scandal. Ethan's blood boiled, not with anger at her, but at himself. He had let the world dictate her worth, and worse, he had believed it. That night, Ethan did the unthinkable. He called a press conference. Cameras flashed as reporters filled the room, expecting another of his cold, cutting speeches. Instead, Ethan stepped forward, his jaw tight, his hands visibly trembling. "I have spent my life believing that control was the only way to survive," he began, his voice raw. "I built walls so high, even I couldn't see over them. And in my arrogance, I drove away the one person who saw the man behind the empire." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan Cross, the ruthless billionaire, was confessing, not his dominance, but his flaws. "I was wrong. About her. About myself. And I would give up everything, if it meant earning her trust again." The footage went viral within hours. For the first time, the world didn't see the angry billionaire. They saw a man stripped bare, humbled by love. But words alone were not enough. Ethan chased her, not with helicopters or lawyers, but with sincerity. He found Amora at a community event she had organized, surrounded by people who respected her for who she was, not who she stood beside. The crowd fell silent when he entered. Ethan crossed the room, no guards, no entourage, just a man carrying the weight of his mistakes. "Amora," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't want your forgiveness because of who I am. I want your love despite it. I'll give up the power, the empire, all of it, if it means I can prove to you that I'm more than the anger you met that first day." For a long moment, she searched his eyes, testing for cracks of pride or control. But what she saw was truth. Vulnerability. Love. Her lips curved into a soft, trembling smile. "I don't need you to give up your world, Ethan. I need you to share it. With me. Honestly. Fully. Without the armor." And as he pulled her into his arms, Ethan Cross, the man once feared as untouchable, was finally touched, transformed not by wealth, but by a woman who dared to love him.